and welcome to Look Down There, the show where we talk about all the things we don't talk about. I'm your host, Michelle Amore. And today you are in for a very big treat. My guest is the founder of the New York School of Burlesque and the author of the Burlesque Handbook, of which I am very proud to be a part of. She is also a fashion historian and the author of Fierce, the history of leopard print. Her newest venture examines the intersection of sex workers, fashion, dress, and culture. Please welcome the fabulous, the iconic Miss Jo Weldon.
Hi, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to see you.
Yes, this is so fantastic. I'm so grateful for Zoom. I never thought I would say that, but after a year of working with it, I feel like I finally figured it out.
Yep, I get that.
Right. So, of course, when I think of Jo, and did you drop the boobs because you were Jo Boobs and now it's just Jo Weldon, or does it matter?
Jo Weldon's been my writing name for decades, and Jo Boobs was the name of a character. And I love it. It's just I never used it really as a stage name because of internet filters and all that kind of stuff. So people usually, they all call me Jo Boobs Weldon. That's fine. But for me, it just had to do with I immediately started getting censored on the internet when I used boobs, even when I spelled it with dollar signs instead of zeros. So.
Yeah, the algorithms get pretty smart, don't they? But when I think of you, I always think about leopard print, of course. So I had to wear my little leopard print turban today. But as I was getting ready, I was like, well, I could wear this leopard print thing or that leopard print thing, or maybe I'll just wear all the leopard print at once. But I am wearing leopard print underwear. You can't see it, but you'll just have to take my word for it.
Me too. And I'm wearing these Betsy Johnson leopard print earrings.
Oh, fabulous. I love it.
It's always there somewhere. And the book is on the shelf back there because I'm that kind of huckster. So
yeah, sell that. So Jo, I feel like you are a woman that has lived many lives. What brought you here to this moment, researching sex workers and their fashion?
I think I was researching sex workers before I was one. I mean, it's so funny because you become an experienced, let's say strippers, which is by far not the only sex work I've done. And, some movie will come out about strippers and all the experienced strippers will be like, oh no, now we're going to have all these newbies, da, 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 da. I was one of those. I was one of those newbies. I saw.
So what movie was it that came out?
It wasn't a movie. It was just the culture,
Okay.
It was Gypsy, which came out the year I was born. It was every stripper I ever saw in a B movie. It was Rocky Horror. It was, everything to do with strippers just really resonated with me. And, and I would find stacks of old magazines because I was always going to used bookstores and stuff. And I would find these images of burlesque women and I'd look at old men's magazines, and I started to realize that a lot of the women who posed nude were the same as the burlesque women. And I realized that all this stuff could overlap and be part of each other. And I was like, I want to be part of that, whatever that is. These are my people, I can tell.
So you started with stripping?
Well, I started with what I'll call hitchhiking.
Oh.
An opportunistic young hooker. And then when I found strip joints, I was pretty happy. I wanted to be in bars. I wanted to party. I loved the people. It was a great space because I was queer in high school and I was beat up for it. I had blood thrown on my locker. I had to go to another school and then I got in trouble there. And it was like the pressure against being, just a general weirdo and a person who was, I wasn't that quiet about it. I was attracted to women and attracted to men and I wanted to be sexually active and I didn't trust anybody in high school enough to be sexually active with them, but whatever. And then, you start going to Rocky Horror and you see all these people, you get involved in nightlife and you meet so many gay and queer and, gender fluid people. I I was like, nightlife is it for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's no place for me during the day.
Right. Yes. Yeah. We dwell at night. That's where we thrive, or where we used to thrive anyway. I can barely stay out past midnight these days.
I know I go to bed at like 10.
Yeah, totally. I like push it to 11:30. Like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not giving in. But did you grow up in New York? Was this all happening in New York for you?
I'm from Denver, but I went to high school and college in Atlanta.
Oh,
And then I
wow.
went to New York in the like mid 90s. But I started working in New York City as a stripper. I was sort of on this circuit of like traveling strippers and groupies that were on the like New York, LA, Portland, which I didn't do, not Portland, but that area that I didn't do. And then Atlanta, because
Mhm.
Atlanta had this huge music scene. So it had a lot to do with the music scene for me, but there were people that were just traveling to make money.
Yeah. So you did that for, I mean, you were a feature, right?
I became a feature dancer in the early 90s. And that was really fun because in order to be a feature, you have to have what they call credits, which is be in a movie or be in a magazine or something. You know, you could have been in a Budweiser commercial, like whatever, something, you know. I know for a lot of people, it was, they were adult, like porn stars who did performances, but I was a centerfold. That was my thing, right? So I groomed myself. I got the look, and then I started touring. And then about after 2 years of touring, I was like, I don't really like traveling this hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love seeing your old photos. They're
Nice.
great. That like they hit me right in the spot that I just love. You know, like you're mentioning Rocky Horror, but for me it was like Flashdance. You know, that's like my aesthetic.
Yeah, it's so funny. I think a lot of people forget Flashdance they were working in a strip joint.
Right. And what kind of strip joint was that, by the way? Like they barely stripped and they did these like high concept numbers. I always think of her act where she's in that white room and there's a strobing and she's like
I
doing
can
all
hear
this
the music.
crazy
Yeah,
movement. Yeah.
He's a Dream. That's the one.
Oh yeah.
I
Oh,
think there were strip clubs like that. Like strip clubs vary from each other so much, but the ones I was in were mostly based on table dancing. So,
okay.
well, I was a feature, you know.
Yeah.
But I did do my first, big ostrich feather fan dance in a strip joint that was not, it didn't usually have features. They did it like once a year.
Yeah. And did you know that you were doing burlesque at that moment?
I mean, I was using, whipped cream and other delights by Herb Alpert. I was in a beaded gown. I had, I knew that I was doing retro stripping, but I had already done that like at Rocky Horror when I was in high school, like, like I'm going to do burlesque. So I kind of knew, but I was still thinking of burlesque as part of the sex industry only, right? Like, which is, a big debate. Is it, isn't it? And I'm like, however you feel about it is fine with me. For me, burlesque in the neo burlesque community has felt different than doing sex work. But if people want to argue that it is or it isn't, I think there's something to be said either way.
Yeah, I know. I do get asked that question and I've landed on it's sexy work. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's what I like. That's how I feel about it. So when did you kind of leave the strip clubs and move into solely neo burlesque and then also teaching burlesque?
I kind of didn't. When I moved to New York, I didn't like the strip joint started taking more and more money out of the strippers' earnings. And I was never, I never worked at like these clubs where people were making $1,000 a night, or if they were, I didn't know about it. Right. But I was making good money.
Mm-hmm.
But they were taking so much of it, I got resentful. And I liked the fetish community. And I started to meet all of these really awesome fetish professionals, dominatrixes, among others. I saw you interviewed Isabella Sinclair, who was tangential. Like, she was at some of the same places, but I don't know if she knows me. I I mean, we've met, you know, yeah. But anyway, so I started to meet these people, and I decided to become a dominatrix because again, so there's always this thing like, you know, all these experienced dominatrixes, like they let these people in that just like the clothes or they just saw a movie. That would be me. I am that person. I saw a documentary called Fetishes, and I was like, oh, that's for me. And I went to work at that place, Pandora's Box.
Great.
Which, and, you know, we were producing magazines there. So I was writing, and we were doing photography and interviews and, you know, and sessions, peeing on people for money. But it was so funny because in the dungeon, people would be like, oh, strippers are somehow lower than dominatrixes. I'm like, we're peeing on people for money. I don't.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting how like all of us who are in these kind of edgier professions, you know, on the fringe, that we also judge each other within that. Like I know when I started in burlesque, there was a lot of judgment around strippers and like a lot of the girls were stripping in secret in order to pay for their burlesque costumes, you know, and I just thought, well, that's just the most ironic thing.
It's so dumb, right? I had people when I very first started working in neo burlesque, and again, this isn't the majority, but these people exist. And because women are so trained to fear the consequences of being seen as a prostitute, and the consequences can be extreme, and in my case, sometimes have been, right? But it's understandable that people are like, no, don't arrest me, you know, don't stone me. And I'm like, well, I had already crossed that line before I did anything milder. I had already done the dirtiest thing for cold hard cash. So I was very relaxed about it. But as far as professional domination goes, I mean, there are dominatrixes that won't pee on people. Don't get me wrong. But I was doing it because I liked it. And I stripped because I liked it. That is to say, of all these jobs, I liked them a lot when I liked them. And then there were times when they were awful because jobs, you know, patriarchy, capitalism, shit.
Right.
You know?
Right. Like we're not immune to that. And like, that's part of the idea of being a sex worker is like, oh, we have to save them. They don't want to be in this position. And it's hard for the public to think that a woman actually enjoys being in that position and wants to be in that position.
Or if she does, then either there's something wrong with her or she's so privileged she doesn't represent anybody else.
Right.
One of those two. It's just a circular argument. You know, they've got a stance about what it means to be in the sex industry. And there have certainly been people who've worked in the sex industry that are against the sex industry and hated it the whole time and didn't want to be there at all. So, you know, I
also, like you said, jobs, right? Like a lot of us work jobs we don't like, you know, but you're not trying to save a woman in middle management, you know, like there's probably more like happiness and fulfillment for more women in sex work than there are in the corporate world.
Well, the hours are more flexible.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you can start the job that day and have money to pay your bills the next day, which is not true of, you know, like it reflects, you know, sex work may or may not reflect problems with society, but it doesn't cause them.
Right. And the people who want to shut it down are usually your best customers.
Yeah, I rarely think of customers as allies, and it's so interesting. It was really interesting during Trump's administration because, you know, as a sex worker, like, you know, you're seeing Republicans and stuff like that, but we all actually started to draw, not all of us, a lot of my friends would start to draw a line. They were like, I found out that my client is a Trumper and I can't see him anymore. It's like, it's funny. We didn't feel that way about Ronald Reagan.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Things got to a level there that, you know, we have to draw our lines, even if it's with P.
Well, I think with Trump, there was, you know, we're in the age of the internet where you can get to so much information about people. And there was just so much information about him that is just like intolerable, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sex work goes back a very long time, right? To the heyday of courtesans and the examples and fashion trends that courtesans would set. And, you know, they were kind of like the rock stars, right? The celebrities back in the day. And it's not really celebrated as much as it was back then. I mean, I think things are changing, right? I think there's a lot of good advocacy work happening around sex work, which you have been a leader of. And I'd love to know more about that.
Well, I can say that a lot of times, and it's the same in, when we look at burlesque legends, like we look at the famous courtesans of the past, and they may not have been the only sex workers, right? So there may have been a lot of sex. There usually were categories of sex workers when you look back at like ancient Greece or what have you. But there were courtesans that ascended to enormous fame and genuine power, like, political influence and stuff like that. Then they still wouldn't be welcomed into quote unquote decent society, but they could accumulate wealth. And they definitely, a lot of times people talk about courtesans, they're thinking of, Venice or London. Some of my favorites are in Victorian London, but there are other courtesan traditions, like I may pronounce this wrong, the Tawif in India, who set standards for etiquette, fashion, could make a particular food popular, and helped lead the rebellion against British power. So it isn't just like this Western phenomenon, or there were courtesans in Edo, Japan, who were hugely influential. So, but there's also always been a divide between, sex workers, even at the highest rank, and, like an acceptable mother for your children. Let's put it that way.
Right, right. So what trends do you see happening in fashion these days that are coming from the sex work industry?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I look at so much fashion, like one of my favorite eras of fashion. And every time I talk about an era of fashion, it starts to turn into my favorite because there's so many cool things. But like, I love the 90s, and you have all these designers in the 90s who were openly drawing from sex work and saying that they were, like, Versace and Gautier and, all these other, I'm forgetting someone, but, but also we forget that like in the Coco Chanel was a courtesan and a Nazi, which is, but all courtesans are not role models.
Right.
And Christian Dior is one of his primary muses, the woman who helped make Leopard Print a part of, like, basically a signature print for them, was a courtesan named Mitza Bricard. So this influence is just ongoing. And so now, people are going back to 90s fashion again. And there's in fashion now, there's usually, polar opposites. So there'll be the modest fashion going right now, and then Fashion Nova, right? Mm-hmm. Both going on at the same time. But I think one thing that's always been powerful about sex workers is the idea of either opulence, right? So a lot of glamour, a lot of makeup, a lot of hair, or the idea of the bare minimum, right? Really skimpy clothes, really loose, undone hair, and both of these things are really huge in fashion recently. And also not just clothing, but the influence of like pole dancing, has been huge.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned Isabella Sinclair, and we talked about the first time that she got into a latex catsuit, and she was like, oh shit, like this is what I'm doing. Like having that really empowering moment. And I know that a lot of the fashion can really empower a lot of women who aren't in that industry. So I'm curious about that. And I'm also curious about the first time that you put on something that made you feel like, oh, this is it. This is me.
Well, I mean, the reality is I've never really figured out how to dress not like a sex worker. Like, I'm always confused. I'm like, are these clothes? How do you get dressed to go to the grocery store? Yeah, I don't get it. Right. So slutty clothes are kind of it for me. I mean, I'm not really wearing anything slutty at the moment, but it's a little chilly in here. But the very first time I put on like a spandex, we had these little loincloths that we would wear. And they were like, because it would give us something additional to take off. And this is just like all spandex. I was like, I felt like a superhero. And Isabella said that too. She felt like a superhero.
Yep.
Because I was, I read comic books, right? Because I was that kind of nerd. And I felt like I was putting on that kind of costume, only it was, even skimpier. And I felt perfectly comfortable in clothing. I felt great walking around in that stuff. I loved putting on high heels, and I love that, how you feel lifted. Although I'm not sure I can wear high heels like I did a year ago.
Yeah. We're going to have to do some serious endurance training.
Yeah, I mean, I was already kind of losing it before with high heels because I was out of practice. I was like, oh boy, I need to, wear my high heels to do housework for a while and get back on it. But, it just felt so comfortable for me. And it was so, it was spandex. That was a big thing for me. And the first time I put on a G-string, I was so excited. I was like, how could I possibly call more attention to my pussy than this?
Oh my God. I love stripper G-strings so much. And I love going into stripper stores and looking at trashy lingerie. Like, I love it. I love, like, the stripper G is great because it really holds in your package, right? Like, it's made for like hardware, and
it lasts forever.
That support. Like, I have got lips, so I want them together, and like that really, they're great. I can't speak highly enough about stripper G-strings.
It's amazing. And they, like every size fits basically like 4 sizes.
Oh yeah. It's great. And like how they come down right on your butt crack and the little thin straps. There was a store in New Orleans called Cutie Pie. I don't know if you ever went there, but I would always go and buy stripper G's there. And it was like one of my favorite things to do.
I love that. And I loved wearing a garter on my leg. And yeah, I mean, I didn't start wearing lingerie and strip joints until later. And I wore it for a little while. I did this really uber femme look for a while, but I tended to go more toward the like superhero, sort of a sleek look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So women who might be interested in experimenting with these kinds of styles and looks, like, where do you recommend they start and how to approach that?
Well, the interesting thing is that you can go on Etsy now and order things custom made in your size. So you could just get one of those spandex dresses, or you could go to any, like, people don't know, like, we shop at Yandy.
Oh, I love Yandy.
I love Yandy. And just buy the outfit and put it on. You don't even have to stand up in it,
Right.
I think I noticed this even teaching burlesque. Like, sometimes, I'll be teaching a bachelorette party, and I know I've talked about this a lot, but, I'll hand some, bachelorette parties, they come in, they're not looking for a big spiritual experience or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But I've seen every now and then I'll hand one of them a boa, and she's just this, mainstream, not really that into it person, they don't know anything about burlesque. But I hand her the boa and their eyes just start to glisten, almost like they're on the verge of tears. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
And nobody ever gave you permission to play with this idea. Like, you've been told that this is not for you on some level. and it could be a part of you. It doesn't have to be your whole identity. Just play with it. But the danger a lot of women feel, and I think, anyone who reads as femme or queer, the danger that they feel constantly is that if they're too sexually available, they're in physical danger, which is, a reality of our culture. Mm-hmm. And the idea, if you act like a prostitute, once you're devalued, once you've crossed that line, you can never go back. And I think it's frightening for people. And for me, like embracing it and going, I'm going there, has been a relief. So I invite people, try it on in private where nobody's going to know that you crossed that line, and see if it's a part of you, and if it's not a part of you, no big deal.
Yeah. Is that something that has contributed to your confidence, or have you always been very confident and in this like ownership of your sexuality?
I have always been willing to take this kind of action, whether I felt confident or not. And so it's interesting to me because I've heard people say, like I'm an older lady now, and people will be like, oh, you're so brave to go out there. You're over 35. I'm like, I'm 58, but thanks. It does feel like bravery to me because it is scarier, right? But the other thing was, when I was young, I judged my body much more harshly. Mm. I compared myself to other young bodies, and I was in front of customers who were critiquing me that way, right? And my ability to conform to the standard made a difference as to whether I ate and paid my rent, So I did take it seriously. But I think the thing is to not so much that I've always had the confidence, but that I've always been willing to give myself permission. And that's what I want to give people when I teach. I was like, right. You have my permission to do this. You also have my permission to not do it, for it to not be for you, and that not be a good or a bad thing. It's neutral. But if this is for you, you have my permission.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that confidence doesn't necessarily mean that you don't experience fear, mm-hmm. That you aren't afraid of judgment. It seems like, how would you define confidence for yourself? Because you said you've done things that maybe you haven't felt confident about. Like, what is that feeling, and what is that mental narrative that you work through?
On stage, it's a level of vulnerability. And, I usually get over feelings of self-confidence by showing interest in the people who are watching. Not an interest in how they feel about me, but an interest in them. Like, how you doing? You look amazing. Like it's much more seductive to go, you look amazing, than to go, I look amazing and you're going to have to deal with it.
Right.
That's not confidence for me. Mm-hmm. So confidence is being willing to accept the outcome of doing what I want.
I love that. That is great. Can you think of a time when you have felt the most you, like the most in your skin, like where everything has just aligned, all the stars have aligned, and you were the most Jo Weldon you could be? Is it fucking? Is it during fucking? Yeah, that's when I feel the most Jo Weldon.
Sometimes. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with either dumb moments, like handing that person the boa and seeing them realize that they have permission, even though, it may not be a big thing for them. I've had some moments. I'm trying to think. I had a really fun time performing right before the pandemic. I had a few times when I went in and I was doubting whether or not the audience would be my audience. And I was performing at this sort of ritzy restaurant, and, I hadn't been keeping up my dance ability, and basically all I was doing was going around motorboating people, which I don't know. What am I going to do if I perform now? I can't motorboat anybody.
I know. We have to really rethink that audience interaction glove peel.
I know. But it was a non-burlesque audience, right? And I was like, they are not going to want to see a woman in her 50s walk around in a G-string and pasties. And I realized that I could have second guessed myself out of that gig because they were 100% with me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment of like accepting their acceptance, letting them give me that compliment and believing in their perception that I was a joy to see that felt like something that I constantly strive for. And when I achieve it, it feels like I'm doing something, not just for myself, but also for the people in the room.
Yeah, like where you really feel like you're in your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I know exactly those kinds of feelings where you're like, yeah, this audience is not going to like me at all. And you get all worked up and then you get out there and you're like, oh, like, oh, maybe I gave them something that they were really hungry for.
Mm-hmm. And conversely, I've had the experience where they didn't like me and I was okay with it. And that feels really like a peak experience as well. Like they just didn't go for it, that I wasn't what they were there for or whatever happened. And I leave the stage and I'm like, not my people.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. But that
That's
can be
okay. I
really,
don't have to hate them. And yeah.
yeah, that can feel really good too, because then you're not fully dependent on that external validation. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you've got that thing inside you already.
But it's work because the world is constantly telling you not to think that way.
Absolutely. It is work. It is everyday work
Yep.
because there is so much piled up against us. And I feel like it just gets more and more and more. And
Yeah.
I was talking with someone yesterday about the double message that women are receiving right now. That we're receiving this message of, empowerment, body acceptance, sex positivity, like pleasure activism, like go get it. But then in the same breath, we're being shamed and censored and put down. And it's like, how do you make sense of these two very different messages being thrown at you at the same time?
Well, it's interesting because it's like because when I started out as an activist in high school, I was an anti-censorship activist. They removed some books from the library that I wanted, and I joined with a local bookstore and got the books back. And it was it was an interesting experience because we got the outcome we wanted, which doesn't always happen when you're an activist, right? But I started really studying censorship and nudity and a lot of the things. And one of the things that I saw was this idea that the female body is harmful in the wrong situation, just the sight of it, the female presenting nipple on Instagram and Facebook, right? It's harmful. And just this weird kind of acceptance, everybody's like, yeah, it is harmful. Yeah, children can't see that. And I'm like, I don't know that I really particularly want children to see all this, like sexual whatever, but you're talking about a nipple, literally a nipple. You can show them a picture of a gun, but not a picture of a nipple. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought a lot of times that it is a testament to our power that the big they, know about our power.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do everything they can to keep it contained. And, we are the only ones who don't realize our power.
Mm-hmm.
But they do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can think about it just with pasties, right? Like at the same time that pasties are a sign of the power that they have to tell us to cover up, there's a sign of the power that we have to decorate and enjoy our body. And nothing is imbued with just one meaning. And that's part of where a lot of my feelings of power come from, when I feel like I'm going to enjoy life and survive all this stuff, which I do clearly. But that ability to see that a lot of times both of these things are happening at once.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be excited when the public discourse turns a little bit less like, there's one definition of this word and there's one right side. And, and I'm not saying that, we need to get friendly with Republicans or anything. but I wouldn't go that far. But it's like the idea that, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a sec.
That's okay.
The idea that because this is the problem I had with anti-porn feminists, right? They would talk about how porn was determined by the male gaze. And every time a man saw you, a photograph of you and jerked off to you, he was raping you and preparing to rape women. I was like, I am not comfortable having this theoretical man or real man's experience define my experience. That doesn't feel feminist to me at all, that his experience erases mine.
Right. And your power is gone in that dynamic.
Yeah. And I was like, it's not, it may be true that he's looking at my picture and jerking off, and that's fine with me. I mean, it's fine with me, you see. And whether or not that's a symptom of patriarchy or capitalism or what have you, doesn't mean that all these other things aren't simultaneously happening, that I'm not having fun on that shoot, that I'm not turned on that shoot, that I'm not turned on by the idea of this guy jerking off to me, that I'm not making money, which literally empowers me, that I'm not having a connection to other people that literally empowers me, even if it doesn't, get me closer to holding public office.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like there's many things that can empower us. It doesn't have to be one way. Empowerment doesn't have to look one specific way. And, as we say, we contain multitudes, right? Like we can move into things that make us feel that power. And it doesn't have to be wearing sexy high heel boots. It doesn't have to be wearing stripper jeans. It doesn't have to be posing naked. It could be, I don't know, playing guitar. It could be like being a hairstylist. It could be doing whatever it is that you feel passionate about, which is the whole point of empowerment, right?
You could be taking a nap,
Oh man, you got me.
Yeah, I think I just, what I want people to feel is that it's okay to be of two minds about a thing. It's okay to see a lot of different ways that things play out.
Yeah, working with that phrase, both are true.
Both are true. And other things are true as well.
Right.
And it's like, I think about it a lot in terms of how I want, one thing that's been interesting for me working on the Sex Worker Style project is that, in 2020, I got a residency at the New York Public Library to go in and do my research there, which I haven't been able to do, but they've helped me with some, offsite stuff. And they just profiled me on their thing, which is, it's interesting because it's the establishment, the library is the establishment, but it's also the seat of knowledge. And it's also a seat of empowerment. And it's also a public resource for, when I was first going into the library to study the history of leopard print, I was going to the Midtown Library and they let homeless people come in there and get warm, So all this stuff is going on. And I felt I had to remind myself, I had to talk to myself because I had been told so often that I didn't belong in this library that I loved so much because I was a used up old whore or whatever. And I was like, well, I may be an old whore, but I'm far from used up, I was promised that the choices that I made would destroy me. And I did see people not make it, in nightlife, I'm going to say, to get nightlife.
Right.
I did see people who didn't survive or who ended up places they really didn't want to be. And I actually felt guilty for having, and it's like, I'm 57 when I got this. I didn't get it in high school because my dad worked for the library. I spent my whole life kind of aiming for something like this and not feeling dissatisfied because I didn't have it, but I didn't get it till I was 57. And then I felt guilty when I got it. And part of the reason that I got it is because a lot of young sex worker activists who really know how to work with social media and have really been able to organize, have made made people see sex work in a way that when I was trying to, we reached very few people. Like, I would be happy just to get another sex worker to feel okay about her job. I'd be like, you don't have to hate yourself. It's okay. Like, that would be my big job for the day, much less getting a piece of legislation passed, which I also worked on and helped, like form legislation and stuff like that. But I feel like this path for me was made by these young activists to the library that they aren't even interested in.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you like reaching just one person is something to be proud of. So be proud of yourself for that. But like, yeah, social media does have the power to reach so many more people. But again, it's like both are true, right? It's like, yes, it has the power to reach all these people. However, we're being silenced before we even start. So yeah. But here you are, like at the New York Public Library, this mecca of knowledge and prestige and esteem, and researching sex workers' style. I freaking love it. I love it so much, and I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really honored that they are accepting my work. But I think that, it's a step forward for sex workers that shouldn't have been so hard won.
Right. But here you are, like continuing to pave that way, right, for everyone to come. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see what you're doing. I can't wait.
Well, I'm really excited. Before the pandemic, I was working on a one-woman show, and I just at the beginning of the pandemic, my mom died, and I just didn't. I haven't been. Everybody's experiencing the pandemic, but I also have been. For a while, I had this big burst of energy, and then I just flattened out. So I feel like I'll be able to get back to that project, the one-woman show about sex work and fashion and why we wore what we wore, and our place in cultural history and all that kind of thing. And it's nice because I think a lot of sex workers are working on these topics, and there's going to be not just my project, but a body of work on it. So I look forward to that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So where can we follow you and all of this work that you're doing?
Most of my work right now is appearing on Sex Worker Style. So you can go to sexworkerstyle.com, which is now just mostly my my Instagram, because I'm posting mini blogs there. And if you go to joweldon.com, you can see what I'm up to. I'm doing the history of Leopard Print in April, and I'm doing a lot of fun stuff. It's a lot of fun stuff. Most of it isn't burlesque. I don't know when other than teaching, I don't know when I'll be back on stage. So.
Yeah, same. It's burlesque adjacent, and reaching outside of that burlesque box is so important and difficult, I'm finding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But rewarding in a completely new way. And I'm happy to be doing that work. And I'm happy to be able to look to you and see what you're doing as well.
I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jo Weldon.
Thank you, Michelle Lamore. I miss you.
I miss you too. This has been so great. I'm so grateful to have you. And audience, please make sure you go and follow Jo and at Sex Worker Style on Instagram or sexworkerstyle.com. And spread your legs and spread the love. Follow us here. Follow me. Follow us at I Look Down There on Instagram, or follow me at Michelle Lamore. And I have a class coming up starting April 25th. It is an 8-week online course called Pussy Confidence, which is all about finding your power, your purpose, your passion, and your pleasure. So make sure you check that out at michellelamore.com/PC. And as always, a friendly reminder to grab a mirror and look down there. Thank you.